Good afternoon, everyone. How are you today? This is the 21st Century Scholars Summer Learning Institute. This institute is brought to you by the 21st Century Scholars Program at Indiana University Bloomington and Community and School Partnerships at Indiana University Bloomington and Indiana Commission for Higher Education. So once again, we thank you for taking part in this opportunity. As you know, this is an opportunity for you to be able to gain some insight on what it takes to be successful at the college level, to work on some skills and identify some skills with math and with writing. We just concluded the math portion of our program, and we begin the writing portion this week. So I'm excited about the start of that new program, a piece of the program, so you can see what skills you have and what skills college expects of you with your writing. So in a nutshell, this is an opportunity for all participants to develop skills, gain insight on how to succeed and how to maximize their performance. With that said, I'd like to turn it over to Julia.
Thank you, Vince. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for being here for our fourth week of the Summer Learning Institute. We're glad to have you join us. I'm going to do a couple of housekeeping things before we get into today's session. So as a reminder, or if you're joining us for the first time today, we want this to be an engaging session. So feel free, if you've got questions or comments that you want to share with us, feel free to unmute yourself and share those with the group, or if you feel more comfortable doing that in the chat section, we'll have that going as well, where we've got Lisa and myself and Vince kind of looking over those and making sure that we answer any questions that appear there. If you were able to join us last week, you heard from future Dr. Patrick Smith, who is the Executive Director of the Mentoring and Leadership Development Services Program at Indiana University. Patrick and his peer mentors joined us to talk about building relationships through mentoring. And so we talked about who's in your fave five, who are those 5 people in your life that are really going to be your supporters and help you through your undergraduate degree and your future career. And then just really focused on building those relationships and the importance of that. Building relationships with faculty, with your advisors, with your peers, so that you've got that network that you're building upon and folks that you know that support you and that you support them as well. Today's session, we're focusing on the inside scoop on the rigors of academic and college life. And we're joined by another future doctor, Andrea Sterling, who is a PhD student in the African American and African Diaspora Studies program at IU Bloomington, and also with the Student Academic Center. And Andrea is going to talk to us about the difference between high school and college and how some tips on how you can ease that transition from high school to college. So with that, I turn it over to Andrea. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. Like Julia said, my name is Andrea Sterling, and I just wanted you to be able to see my face before I start sharing my screen, and we can get into the presentation. Let's see. Okay. So can we all see my screen? Is that working?
Yes, we can see you.
Excellent. So as we were saying, my name is Andrea, and I will be doing this presentation on some of the differences between high school and college, and then really kind of getting us into learning strategies that will help you as you begin to navigate academia and try to achieve a collegiate success. So just some more introductions. So some of this was stated already, but just so you can get a little bit more of a sense of who I am. I'm a doctoral student here in African American and African Diaspora Studies. I got my master's in the same program here at IU. And then for my bachelor's, I did that back home in Rhode Island. So I'm all the way from the Northeast, and I got that in African American Studies as well as Gender Studies. So kind of maybe what you can see here is I am very much a lifelong student and scholar. This is very much an academic resume I have here, which is fine. I love university, and so I'm excited to be able to talk with you all about it. Some people might share this background with me as well. I'm a first-generation college student, so both of my parents immigrated here from Jamaica, one with a high school education, one without. So it's really exciting for me to be able to have that as a part of my story as a first-generation college graduate and kind of continuing on through this, but also to be an example of, you know, we've got this and we can do it. Whether or not we have immediate examples in our home, it is very much possible. And my email address is here if anyone wants to reach out after this session for questions, or between this session and next week's. I'm definitely open to communication.
Andrea, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think we might need to refresh your screen because we're not seeing those slides in the presentation mode.
Okay. What does it look like right now?
It needs to be converted to slideshow. It's still showing your other side.
Let's see. So does it look good now?
Can you enable the enable editing and then try that again? Perfect.
Great. And now we're on the introduction slide along with me?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Sorry about that. So it would be great if some of the people in the room could introduce themselves, maybe saying their name and one thing that they're the most excited about for college.
My name's Sharon Anthony, and I'm most excited about attending Kelly School of Business.
Great, excellent. Thank you. Raylonda?
My name is Raylonda. One thing I'm excited about is meeting new people.
Great, excellent. Java?
Hello, my name is Java, and one exciting thing is going out and experiencing new things.
Great. And Miguel, would you share your name and what you're excited about?
Yeah, my name is Miguel, and I'm probably most excited about like finally being sort of away from home and like able to make more decisions myself.
Excellent. Thank you all for sharing that. And some of what came up we'll be talking about. You know, these are definitely some key differences that happen in college. You have a bit more freedom, you have more sense of how to be the CEO of your own schedule, but also what comes from that and what are some tips and tricks that we can take on to make sure that we find some semblance of balance. So some key terms for today's session that I want us to kind of be thinking about at the beginning and then, you know, keep thinking about throughout would be learning, time management, and purpose. So what do you all think of when you hear the term learning? What comes to mind?
Well, probably like you have like your education, like what you would pay for, but also like learning like your own like personal experience, like how to improve upon yourself and all of that.
Great. Any other thoughts on learning? Does learning only happen in the classroom?
No, it can happen anywhere.
Right. So that's something that's important to keep in mind as well. Not just that learning can happen outside of the classroom, but also just how we think about what we're learning and how to borrow different kind of strategies for learning and bring them into other spaces. So for anyone who is a musician or has done acting or anything like that, where you've gotten used to the idea of practice, but you've not necessarily brought that into the classroom, that's a great example of how you can take different forms of learning and practices and bring that into your college life. So if you play the oboe or the clarinet or guitar, you might have learned that you need to do that over and over again to really kind of get to a point of excelling. And that's true too when it comes to math, or it comes to even dealing with different aspects of English literature or learning different business practices. You know, for those who are going into Kelly, it takes practice, not just sitting in the classroom and listening to what the instructor is saying, but how can you keep this information in your mind frequently so you develop some muscle memory around it. So that's something to kind of keep in mind, and we'll continue talking about throughout the session. Time management is also something that we'll be hitting on, and I think is a really difficult thing to get used to. Even now, after having been in school for quite some time, I still struggle with time management. I think that that is something that a lot of people find as a weakness. And so kind of learning how to best manage our times and find different ways to hack ourselves and our schedules to make that easier. And then of course, another term I want us to think about and center both for this presentation, but going into next week's as well, would be the question of purpose. And so a lot of times when we hear purpose, we might think, well, what does that mean? Are we saying like, what's my purpose, as in my life goal? And yes, that is partly what I'm asking you to think about. We're not often given that much time to consider what our genuine purpose is and why we're doing the things that we're doing. But it's important to ask ourselves that, so that when the going gets tough and we find that things are difficult, we can remember, well, why are we here? Why am I doing this? Why does it matter? So as an example for me, I know that my purpose is teaching. I love educating, whether that's in the classroom or also in community spaces. And for the kind of teaching I want to do, I need a PhD for it, which means that even though I don't always love having to write my dissertation, I know that I have to set out time to do it, because that is just a step for me to get towards my purpose. Thinking about purpose is also useful when we're talking about these learning strategies, or when you're going through a class that you just aren't that interested in or can't totally wrap your mind around. And when we get more into what critical reading is. Essentially with purpose, it's asking the why questions. Why does this matter? Why does this speak to something else? Why is my brain making these kind of connections? Why does this exist? And how is it helpful? How is it going to get me somewhere further or somewhere else? When we're able to answer those why questions and have a sense of purpose, it makes it easier for us to continue to build those habits and to keep following along, to keep doing something. If we're reading, for example, and we understand why the author is making a certain argument, it makes it a little bit easier to track the rest of that work. And so you'll see this idea of purpose coming into play as we talk about the different learning strategies today. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the difference between high school and college. So I want to hear from all of you on some of this. But first we have to think about this, right? We're in this next leg of our journey. What's next? So high school and college have some key differences. I think some of you may have already gotten a sense of them through the other presentations, or even when you've talked about what you're excited for in college. So you have some idea of the differences. But some of the major ones are going to require that you internalize and implement strategies for learning, for connecting with peers, as well as managing an effective balance between work and play. I think one thing that people might be familiar with is how often middle school and especially high school teachers sometimes use the idea of college differences almost as a threat, or to get you to get your work done. So maybe people have heard teachers who will say, you know, you have to get your work in on time, professors won't accept your late work, or you better get used to taking notes, there won't be PowerPoints in college. And if you've already kind of seen, there are plenty of PowerPoints in college. You do still have to get used to taking notes. It's a different kind of note-taking though. So while some of these threats hold water, the differences are a little bit more complicated, and many of the differences have very little to do with what's happening inside of the classroom and have more to do with what's going on outside of the classroom. And so even the most high achieving high school student will come into college needing to make adjustments in how they navigate the academic terrain. So maybe they were so used to just going in and studying one way and acing a certain test, but now you're in college and you have to figure out a new way to tackle studying, figure out a new way of making sure you see your friends, but that you're getting your homework done and you're making time for extracurricular activities. One of the reasons why it's helpful to know this going in is because we're not often told so explicitly that we need to maybe reshape our learning strategies, reshape our study practices. If you're very used to getting high B's and high A's in high school, it's easy to think to stay on that same track. And sometimes what happens is that we learn we need different things the hard way through not getting the grades that we want. And it can be really easy to internalize that and think that there's something wrong with you as the student, that maybe you're not good enough, something's going wrong. And that's very much not the case. What is really happening is that we just need to make some adjustments with how we're tackling this new space. So now I'd love to hear from you all. We can kind of have an open and free-flowing discussion here about what you think some major differences between high school experience and college will be.
I think one thing will be that you'll be more independent and not have someone there telling you to do things.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Other thoughts? I'd love to hear from each and every one of you for this question.
Also, going off her of being independent, it means more responsibility for yourself. So, like homeworks and studying and note taking and all of that.
Also, like, just the sheer amount of opportunities you can have, like, within those 4 years will probably be, like, easily more than double of what you would have in high school.
Mm-hmm.
Managing your time will be different with your classes and your schedule, and just knowing when to do things and when not to do things will be different.
So what do we think would be, of the ones mentioned, which one do you think would be the most challenging? Or even if there's another one you can think of that might be the hardest difference between high school and college?
I think time management.
Why do you say that?
Because I manage my time well, like for high school, but with college, there's more work, and like I was looking, you have to spend more time like out of class working on things.
Mm-hmm. Was it Java? Am I saying that right?
Yes.
What about you? What do you think will be the most challenging difference?
I think probably like responsibility on like getting stuff done, because normally in high school I would have like study halls and things like in school when we would just do homework and anything like that. And being in college and being out of school trying to do work can be kind of like kind of distracting with everything out of school. So just that.
I feel like that connects really well with what Miguel had brought up as a major difference. The fact that there will be so many options in front of us. How do we even make the choice of, sometimes what we choose to do is not always what is best for us. It might just be what seems the most interesting at the time. Great. All right. So you all hit on some of the major differences that we can see here on this slide. It seems like we were all on the same page along the lines of either time management or responsibility being some major differences. So kind of as a general overview, here are some 4 major differences. These are not the only ones, but I think that they cover a great deal of them, and they're definitely not mutually exclusive. So these differences all interconnect. So first we have time. And this was mentioned as well, right? There's consistency to your high school schedule. school's in session for generally the same time every day, whereas in college, you might have a class that meets at 8 a.m. and only on Wednesdays. And then you have another class that's Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and that meets at 7 p.m. in the evening, not counting your 3 other classes that is spread all throughout the day and throughout the week. So there's not necessarily the same kind of daily consistency. So that's something to also get used to. And then, of course, in high school, your time and schedule is often managed by other people, or at least co-managed, because for some of us in high school may have had other jobs or something like that where you had some say in your schedule, but there is definitely a lot of other voices and a lot of help helping you along. In college, you are more so the boss of your schedule, even when it comes down to selecting classes. You might know what gen ed requirements you need, but you decide based on what times they're available, what days are available, what works for you. And so you have to keep in mind that with freedom does come responsibility, which brings us to the next part about freedom. Your schedule, your hobbies, and your study plans, they're all relatively your choice, which can be super exciting, incredibly liberating, but it's very much an easy distraction if you're not mindful. And I think what's good is that a few of you already seem to be aware of the potential for distraction. And so that's something that you can kind of keep in your mind going forward, that yes, there may be so many different shows that you can go to and different presentations and maybe even parties that exist. It doesn't mean that you actually need to go to every single thing. It could be good to choose study hall instead. It could be good to choose, to just stay home or stay in your dorm and talk with your roommates. Or suite mates. I'm not sure how that's going to look in the fall for everyone, but making these kind of choices and sometimes learning to do what might be best for you academically isn't always what is the most interesting or fun thing for you in the meantime. So then, of course, we also have social connections. I think that this sometimes is one that gets underestimated as a difference. For many of us in high school, we know a lot of the people in our classes, whether it's because we've been in high school with them for 4 years. Depending on where you're from, you might have even been to middle school with some of them, maybe even elementary school. So you have people who have been in your life for a little bit longer. And then in college, you go into a class, you might not know anyone in that space. You might not know any of your classmates in any of your classes, or the next semester you feel like you were just getting used to your peers and now you have a whole new bunch of people to choose from. It can make it hard to feel like you're building genuine connections between folks. So that's one of the things that is a major difference with college, is that you have to be a bit more intentional with your social connections, but that's also a plus side. With high school, there's a lot of friends of convenience. You've known each other forever. They've always been around. It's easy to just fall into friendship. But with college, you get to choose, maybe you're always around basketball, and so you're always doing that, and you made a whole bunch of friends that also liked that. But you're realizing that was never your purpose. That was just something you got pushed into. So maybe now in college, instead of hanging around the gym all the time, you decide that you want to check out some photo editing classes, or you want to, see what some other organizations are about. It allows you to get more into different networks that have shared interests with you. And that can allow for more genuine and long-lasting friendships and bonding. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword. There's positives and negatives to these differences. And then, of course, there's the learning strategies, which we'll talk a bit more about. So the structure of high school built in a lot of different learning strategies a bit more implicitly. So some of these things that I'm going to discuss with you, you might feel like you've done them already or you have some familiarity, but the difference is it might have just been built into your high school schedule. So other people were determining this for you, as opposed to you deciding that you want to practice space practice, for example, or that you want to, sit down and really quiz yourself or quiz your friends. In high school, they're giving you the material, you're reading it. They might have a review test. They also will have presentations or book reports that you're writing, where you get to regurgitate and recall the information and kind of teach yourself and teach your peers. But in college, the assignments aren't necessarily built for you to work on these learning strategies. You have to choose to apply them. So instead of having a book report in an English lit class in college, you're probably going to have a book review, which means that you have to put in more of your own knowledge. You're not just saying what you read, but you're making different connections. You're evaluating the strength of arguments. You know, you're really putting things into practice and getting out there, which means that the learning process needs to be happening more so and often in your own time. So speaking of time, we have discussed kind of bits and pieces of this, right? So college is not 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. 5 days a week. Sometimes you might even end up with a semester schedule where you are spending less literal hours in class compared to high school, but you have to keep in mind that a great deal of college learning and work happens outside of the classroom. Different universities phrase it a bit differently, but a lot of them generally say that if you have, for example, a 3 credit hour class, that might mean that you're meeting for class for 2.5 to 3 hours, but you should also be expecting to do about double that amount of time on your own. So doing that work, reading through the material, testing yourself, writing all of the papers, it's not just the literal class time. A lot of it is happening on your own. And so being able to keep that in mind as you're managing what you need to get done, as you're trying to figure out what can fit into your schedule and what does not. There's no bells or voices or intercoms that will help you move throughout your day. You have to be your own shepherd. So it's up to you to make sure you get to your classes on time, as well as finding room in your day to eat and nourish yourself. That one might seem like such a given. Why am I including that? But often when we're running late or when we haven't managed our time, what we decide to sacrifice is often our own well-being. So you woke up late, so you skipped breakfast. You did that 4 days in a row with no breakfast. There's not enough time to have lunch. All you've had is a granola bar. And then dinner time, you just carbo load because you're starving at that point. But that might then affect your sleep, and that might then affect the next day. So it all kind of rolls into each other and can be a consequence of poor time management as well. So being able to figure out how to make sure that you can get to your classes on time, that you can get your studying done, that you can feed yourself and feed yourself in a way that really feels nourishing and sustainable. All of that is a part of time management. Even things like making sure your phone is charged at night, because that is what's getting you up in the morning, a combination of your sheer will and your cell phone alarm, or if you have an old-fashioned alarm clock. So a lot of these things are differences between college and high school. Same with if you miss class, it might not seem like an immediate consequence. You won't be called into the office and have someone else that you need to be reporting to. But what will happen is that when it comes time for the test, you might realize, some people do, I've had students who feel this way too, that they're like, well, I'll just read the material on my own. I don't have to go to all of the classes. But then you sit down for the exam and you realize, wow, so much of this was actually covered in lecture, or I could have had some time to break down these concepts with my professor, with my peers, had I attended class. So that's one way that we can begin to feel the consequence of showing up late or skipping entirely due to bad time management. But also, oftentimes there's some sort of like late policy or attendance grade, and that'll impact your final grade. So it's not always an immediate consequence, but there are so many different ways that having poor time management can affect you personally, but also you as a scholar and as a student. So it's important to recall that, or to remember that you're responsible for managing your own time. Now, I kind of say all of this, and it's all very preachy, you know, you are your own CEO of your schedule, as if it's easy, but it is not easy, and I will admit that. One of the things with time management is that it takes intentionality and it takes commitment. So we were saying how often high school has made our schedule for us, right? So you have this amount of hours that you're in class, you know that you're going to study hall at this time. It doesn't actually allow you to build up the muscle to learn how to make time management your own hobby, something that you are doing for yourself. And so that's where the intentionality part comes in, and why it's important to be thinking about that now before you've even hit the college campus, to figure out, you know, what are some things that you need to do? What are some of your weaknesses as it pertains to time management, and how can you circumvent that? What does it look like to regularly make to-do lists, or to make sure that you bought several planners? For me, I have a paper planner and I have about 3 different digital planner apps. And I do that because I know I need something to remind me physically, but also I need different alerts just to keep me on schedule and keep me on track because I am highly distractible. So that's one of my ways of learning how to be intentional with how I set up my time management. So I'll let you in on a tip to also get you started. One really popular tip for time management is something called Eat That Frog. This is kind of based on and inspired by this Mark Twain quote where he says, quote, "If it's your job to eat a frog, it's best to do it first thing in the morning. And if it's your job to eat 2 frogs, it's best to eat the biggest one first," end quote. Now, he's obviously not literally talking about a frog that's jumping and squirming and all of that. But really, it's just this idea of what is it that you might not really want to do and how can you tackle that first? So with Eat That Frog, you need to first get into the habit of making to-do lists, not just in your head. I think a lot of times we think, okay, I figured out what my plan is for the day. I don't need to write it down. I've got this. But that's a really easy way to forget some things that you need to do or little details or time. So it's good to actually write them down and have a consistent place where you're writing them down. So of course, I recommended having like a paper version where it's a physical planner of some sort. But if you are more into the apps or using your phone or tablets, there are a lot of really great ones. There's of course the schedule that's built into your app. If you use Android phones or if you have any Google apps, you can download, they call it Keep, like K-E-E-P. And that one's neat because it looks like just a bunch of Post-it notes. So that can be a way that you keep your to-do list with you at all times. And allows you to scratch off the things that you've already completed. So once you're here, you've made your to-do list, you're reflecting on what you need to put on it. So you're thinking about the tasks on your daily to-do list. One thing to always keep in the back of your mind, or really in the forefront of your mind, is that there's always something to do. It's really easy for us to think, well, I have nothing to do, I'm going to take this day off. But in reality, especially once we're into the groove of college learning, there's always something that can be done. You know, maybe you don't have a test or a paper due today, but it wouldn't hurt to pick up a book and study, or it wouldn't hurt to go to office hours, right? These are all things that you could be doing. And so if you choose to not do anything, that can be okay. We all need personal days at times, but we have to recognize that that is a choice. And so it's never really a question of what do I need to do today? Because the answer is always going to be something. You have to ask yourself, how do I prioritize the things that I need to do today? And so the answer to that question is essentially that you need to eat the frog. So if we think about this analogy of the frog, it can be a few different things. Imagine, you know, someone told you to eat a frog, and we're not talking about fried frog legs that some people still might not be into, but it's very popular amongst like Cajun folks and the French, right? So fried frog legs, not terrifying. But imagine with this analogy for eating the frog, that it is a squirmy and slimy frog that is riveting and that is, you know, reminding you of Kermit. You have all these memories around this frog, and this is on your to-do list, right? So the idea is no one really wants to eat the frog, but you have to get it done. So you might as well do it first. Get it out of the way, and everything else on your to-do list will feel more manageable. So the frog can be the thing that is the most difficult on your list. It can also be the thing that you have very little motivation to do and are most likely to procrastinate on, right? So staying with the analogy, if you wake up in the morning and the little frog is looking at you and you look at it and you say, no, I'm not gonna eat you right now. So you put it away and you say, let me eat breakfast first. Let me go on and, you know, go to my first class. I'll eat the frog later. So now it is later, you're after class. The frog is just making little ribbit noises in your book bag and you're dreading it. And you're saying, no, 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 let me just, you know, I'm going to go work out at the gym. I'm going to do this other thing and then I'll eat the frog. And that just keeps happening and happening until it's nighttime. You're in bed laying your angelic head down on the cushion, you know, and then you hear the frog again and it jumps onto your head, reminding you that you actually never got this major thing done. So no one wants that, right? This cycle of procrastination that keeps happening, because it's easy when we have a difficult task or something that we're not that interested in, we keep pushing it off and pushing it off. But with the Eat That Frog tip, if you tackle it first, one, it's a major success that you can use to start your day. You get some momentum going. It makes everything else seem doable, because this was the absolute hardest thing on that list, the thing you were dreading the most. And if your frog happens to be a ginormous frog that does not seem like you can tackle in one go, then break that up. Right? So let's say that math is a frog for you. You're in calculus and you have a test coming up and you are terrified about it. You need to study for it, but it's just giving you so much stress and anxiety. Well, now let's recognize that studying for that calc exam is your frog, but it feels so big that you don't know how to begin tackling it. Well, chop it up into little pieces. Maybe the first thing you do is email your professor and ask if they're available to meet for office hours, if they have a practice test that you can look at. So now you've woken up, you did that as your first thing. Maybe the whole task isn't completed yet, but now you've made a major step. You've made some headway and you have momentum going. That makes you more inclined to keep going. So now you've met with your professor, you've gotten the practice test, and the next part of the frog to tackle is doing the test. So now you can do the test. Maybe you call some friends who are in that class and you all have a little study session where you're tackling that part of the task. Great, now that's done. And now you're home and you're like settling into bed and you're ready to move forward. And you're thinking, ooh, I still think there's a tiny bit of that frog left. There's that test tomorrow. I'm feeling mostly good. What can I do to complete eating this frog? So now maybe you just review your notes again one last time. And it's not a wild cram session. You don't feel the same level of anxiety because you were able to parcel out that task throughout the day and it felt more manageable and more doable. Do we have any questions on eating the frog? Okie dokie. So I will give us this little intermission here just as an important reminder. So it's not a little intermission, but I do want to say and reiterate that you're not actually alone. So I've been saying you are the CEO of your own schedule. You are the boss of your time. All of this freedom comes with responsibility that is yours alone to take a handle on. The reality is, yes, you are the CEO of your schedule. Yes, you do have more freedom and responsibility, but I really don't want you to leave this session thinking that you have to shoulder all of the burden on your own. There are so many resources at any given campus that you go to that you can rely on, that you can kind of call upon to help you through things. So regardless of what campus you end up calling home, remember that the support systems are there. They might just have some different names. So yes, so writing tutorial services is a major one. Student academic centers and academic success centers. At some different schools, they might call it different things. At IU, it's Student Academic Center. These places are excellent because they have tutoring available. They also tend to offer classes for academic success. So for example, a class that I'm teaching in the fall, it's X159 U at IU. The idea is that it's all about connecting the students to resources on campus. It connects them to their peers. So a lot of things that we do in that class, we'll have the students do group things, getting to know each other, working on projects together so they can connect with their peers, as well as joining student organizations. That's actually the final project for that class. So you can get a sense of other people outside of your immediate network and build those kind of connections. And then a big part of that class is also connecting you to yourself, asking you those kind of tough questions of what is your purpose? What are the things, that you're looking for as a student? Why have you decided on your major? What does that mean for you? And so to be able to do that in a classroom space and have that kind of facilitation, the Student Academic Center does that. They also have other courses that will help people through certain very difficult math classes that a lot of IU is known for. We have classes that help you with that. We have critical reading courses that can help you cultivate yourself as a student. And other campuses have that as well through their student academic or academic success centers. And then, of course, there's counseling and psychological services, because this is a stressful time and it can be useful to talk to someone to have that kind of support. A lot of universities do something similar where they will offer at least 1 or 2 sessions kind of on the house, and then after that figure out different payment plans. So that's something worth looking into, no matter what college you end up attending. Is seeing these services and knowing that you're not actually going at it alone. There are resources to help you kind of get a sense of your terrain, to help you get a sense of your responsibilities, and to support you, because this is, like I said, a very stressful time, and it's helpful to have support. I think that one thing I didn't put in the PowerPoint, and I think because it is often so implied, but your instructors are a part of your support system too. So making use of office hours, and that connects back to writing tutorial services. A lot of times professors will tell you to come to office hours, but they never really talk about what office hours are or how to handle them. And the difference in high school, a lot of times meeting with your teacher after class feels like something has gone wrong, that, you know, maybe you feel like you're not good enough or you're in trouble. But in college, frequently, the people who meet with their professors the most for office hours are the ones who are also doing the best in class, because they're able to talk through the ideas more, to get a sense of what the instructor is looking for. So it's definitely something that is useful to put into your schedule. And if you need something to help you figure out what to talk to your professors about, writing tutorial services is a good one, because you bring in your essays, your writing assignments, they help you revise them, they kind of can talk through those ideas with you, and now you have a revised paper you can bring to a professor, just to have some sort of prop to get the conversation going. So that's one example of how you can connect these different resources and really help kind of build a support team for you as a student. Are these services free, paid for by tuition? So that is one of the wonderful and beautiful things for the most part. So excluding counseling and psychological services, which after the first, and I can only speak for IU, and different schools do it differently, but there can be a cost associated after
It looks like maybe Andrea's having some technical issues, so hopefully she'll be able to join us shortly. I don't want to speak too much in addressing her question, but what she was saying was, speaking for those students who are attending IU, specifically IU Bloomington, I think you get 6 free sessions with our counseling and psychological services. And then, as she mentioned, there's, you can work with the CAPS Center to then do a payment plan that really works for you and your budgetary needs. So, but most of those other services, they are free. They're part of the fees that you pay at the beginning of the year. And you can utilize those as many times as you want. So you don't have to worry about having only a limited number of times that you can go to the writing center. You could go every single week if you'd like. You could take advantage of tutors and the folks that you're meeting through this program as well. So yeah, take advantage of those as you need them, or as she said, kind of building them into your support system as you go along.
An important piece to add is, if you are experiencing difficulty in a course, please be certain to contact our office if you're a 21st Century Scholar, which you are, so that we can help you navigate if you don't know where a tutor is for a particular course.
So great question, Miguel. Any other questions now that we're kind of at a pause? All right, I think we're getting Andrea back now. Hey, Andrea.
Sorry about that.
No worries. Vince and I were just trying to address that question that you were working on there. So
Oh, great.
I think we're set.
Excellent. Okay. So it feels like that was addressed and answered.
Yeah, I don't think we've had any further questions or follow-up. So, but of course, if there are still lingering questions about that, let us know.
All right. And the screen looks good for everyone again?
Yep, you're great.
Great. Okay. So moving forward. So getting into some of these strategies now. So some strategies for effective learning. I have 5 for you. We'll talk a little bit more at length on the first 3. So, as well as the bonus of hacking your memory. So keep in mind that these strategies work alongside one another. They're not necessarily separate entities. And you'll be able to see that as we move forward. So space practice. Who's heard of cramming before? Can someone give us a definition of what cramming is?
Just sort of taking all the information you need for like a test or an essay or something like that last minute and trying to memorize as much of it as you can for an exam or something like that.
Right, that's perfect. That's exactly what cramming is. So cramming is something that I won't say we have not done before. It's something that I've done before, even while I've known it maybe wasn't the best choice, but it does seem to be something that is a part of the learning experience. But the reality is cramming is not ideal for us to actually learn and remember what we've learned. It might work for short-term memory. You do it right before a test, you take that test, you know, the terms all came to mind, but then as you walk out of the room, you've forgotten most of the concepts that you were just tested on. The beautiful thing about spaced practice is it allows you to feel less stress and anxiety because it's not all happening 5 hours, 6 hours before the exam. You're spacing things out, but also it's actually getting more rooted into your memory so that you can retrieve it later. You can recall it later and continue to use that kind of information in the future. So you're spacing out or spreading out your learning and your studying over a longer period of time. So for example, if you planned on cramming for biology for 6 hours straight the night before an exam, with spaced practice, you can take that same amount of time, but you're just going to have a little bit more forethought and spread it out earlier in the week. So instead of shoving all of your studying into one 6-hour chunk, you would spread out the learning over time, maybe 2 hours every day, every other day before the exam. That way you can kind of read the information, have a break, have some space away from it, come back to it, test yourself to see how much you remembered, where, you know, what is it that's not sticking in your memory, and therefore how can you change your studying strategies to get to the thing that you're weakest at and make sure you can then kind of get that solidified in your mind. And this is partly why spaced practice is so effective. Cramming, like I was saying before, will help you in the short term, certainly, but you're more likely to forget what you learned from cramming than spaced learning. And especially when you're in college, your future learning is heavily dependent on what you've already learned. Not just saying week 2 versus week 15, but if you're taking courses that are required for your major, then maybe you're in a 100 level version of biology, with the hope of eventually being in the 300 level version or getting into macrobiology and all sorts of things like that. You need to be able to remember what you learned, what you had been studying 2 years prior or 6 semesters prior. And so spaced practice helps a lot with that. And so here are some tips for how to practice this. And of course, the presentation will be available for you too, so you can keep in mind kind of these ideas of how to practice this. So one important thing with space practice, and this is why I mentioned how time management is the umbrella for a lot of the learning strategies, because you do need to be able to have a sense of what your time is moving forward. So I earlier recommended getting a planner or making use of some of the calendar apps on your phone before classes begin. So getting a sense of what your class schedule looks like so that you can begin thinking about what your study schedule is. This goes back to what I was saying before with 3 credit hours might mean that you have 3 hours in class, but you also need to be thinking about, well, what does that look like for my out of class studying time? So then being able to plan that out and being able to schedule how you're studying, how much time you're giving certain classes, and how you can space them out to best be effective for your learning. A part of practicing space practice is also reviewing. So you want to review the information from your classes, but it is absolutely necessary that you give yourself a bit of a break. So let's say you have a class that meets on Wednesdays and Fridays. That means that you're in class. You have active learning happening during that time. So the best time to review your notes might not be immediately after class. It could be helpful for you after that Wednesday class to maybe at the earliest look at it Wednesday night. But in reality, it's really great for you to take your Wednesday class, have that be active learning, and then on Thursdays, take that as the time that you are studying and reviewing that information. That way you are consistently working on it, but you're also giving your memory some time to essentially almost forget. You're not completely forgetting, but it's going a little bit further into the recesses of your mind. That way you can strengthen your ability to retrieve it. That's what's really hard. If you've ever experienced wanting to remember what a song is called or a certain word that's just on the tip of your tongue and you can't remember it, so you end up, instead of trying to pull it out, just taking out your phone and looking it up. What that does is it weakens our memory recall muscles. So with space practice, it's kind of asking us to strengthen those muscles all over again, giving us enough time to the point of almost forgetting so that we can practice retrieval, so that we can make sure that the information is getting concretized or made more concrete into our minds. You also want to constantly be refreshing yourself on the information. So don't only focus on the newest information. Remember to go back and study the older information so that that stays fresh in your mind as well. A really great way of doing that is connecting older information to new stuff, which is what your classes expect you to do anyway. Professors love to see when a student can make reference to something they read in week 2 during week 12. So not only will it get you brownie points in that way, but it actually helps your mind be able to form those kind of connections and see how everything is kind of relating to one another to keep that older stuff fresh, but also recognizing how knowledge is building upon itself. And then, of course, you have to be intentional with your studying. This is another reason why cramming is so ineffective. Oftentimes when we cram, we have the textbook, we have our highlighters and maybe some Post-it notes, but really we're just reading through the information. We're just reading through our notes. We're not refreshing our minds. We're not really pushing ourselves to test ourselves, to question our assumptions in what we're reading. We're just reading it for what it is, which means that we're not actually doing the most active learning possible. So when you're studying, don't just reread your notes. Find ways to stay actively engaged as you review the material. Try to pair space practice with some of the other learning strategies to best maximize the practice. So another one I'll be talking about is testing yourself. So maybe, you study on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays for that fantasy biology class that we've been working on, analogizing this whole time. So you have biology Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, and you study for it on Monday evenings. But then on Tuesdays, you want to do a little bit of work for it as well. So maybe you decide that Tuesday's space practice would be you testing yourself or testing yourself with a study group, and you all make practice tests for each other. So now on Tuesdays, instead of just reviewing the information, you're actually trying to put it into practice. You're seeing what you actually remember. And then you come back to it on Thursday. And now with Thursday, what you're doing is reviewing the notes, seeing what you missed during the practice test, you know, which answers did you get incorrect, and seeing how you can rectify that and relearn that information that wasn't sticking with you as well. So there are ways that you can kind of mix up how you are working on space practice to help keep things new and to help make sure that you don't fall into autopilot, so that you're still actively learning the material and still actively solidifying that into your mind. And so the next one being test yourself, this is retrieval practice. This is you actively trying to strengthen those memory recall muscles. You're going into your mind trying to retrieve the information. And so it's all about being purposeful, intentional, and doing it on your own. So when you're actively trying to use retrieval practice, you don't have your course materials out with you. You're really going off of memory recall muscles here. So this is something that you can kind of see how it relates immediately to the classroom, because if you're able to work on memory retrieval and you can get things faster and faster, then when you have that timed final exam, you're not sitting there stressed about, oh my gosh, am I going to remember this thing? How long will it take for me to remember this? Because you've been working on that this whole time. You've been learning what these dates are and how they associate with people's names, and you've been practicing how to get that out of the recesses of your mind. You've been timing yourself before. You've been testing yourself prior to this actual test you're being graded on. So then a lot of that anxiety can kind of go away. So if you really think about a lot of anxiety that we have around exams, is not just, will I be graded well? What's going to happen? It has to do with the fact that it just feels new, that, okay, now I have 50 minutes to put all this information that I've been learning onto this paper, onto this Scantron. But if you've been practicing this for a while, it will feel less scary. It'll feel less like new territory because you've been doing it. So some ways that you can practice this, putting away course material and writing down what you remember from class. Afterward, check your notes against this, right? Check your notes against the class material to see what you got correct, but also to see what you missed. So this is something that could be nice to do maybe in the evenings after you've had some of your classes, just kind of writing down what you remember, what was discussed in lecture, and looking through that. And then, of course, looking back to your actual notes from class, just so you can see what was correct and what wasn't. If your professors offer practice tests, you should definitely take them up on that offer. If not, you can see what the different academic support services have to offer, or you can make your own. If you have some friends or study pals that are in the course, you can make practice tests for each other and then kind of swap them around. The important thing here is that you need to always be rechecking against your coursework for accuracy. It's not enough to test yourself to see what you remember if you don't then see if it was correct, because you might be misremembering it or not remembering it completely. So making sure to kind of go back, look at your coursework, and use that to help you as you go through the practice test answers, as you go through what you had jotted down prior. And then go and see if there's any patterns in what you keep forgetting, because it might be due to how maybe how the information is being shared with you. If you're constantly having a hard time remembering just what the professor said in lecture, but you're doing okay with what's in the textbook, that might mean that you need to develop a new strategy for your lecture note-taking, or to find ways to do more office hours. Just find some way to help strengthen what might seem like weaknesses going into it. But it's hard to identify the weaknesses if we're not getting into a pattern of testing ourselves and constantly seeing what is presently working for us and what might not be. So then the next one would be elaboration and connection. So elaboration is all about finding the meaningful connections between concepts. So some questions to ask yourself when practicing elaboration is, what does concept A remind me of? And then of course, how so? Why do I associate these different things? How can I connect concept A to the concept B and C? Are they similar? Are they different? And again, how so? Another question would be, what would be the meaning of concept A in a different scenario? Can I apply it to something outside of the course subject? How would that work? I'm going to use an example here instead of just using the alphabet. So if this were a course, we can say that concept A would be space practice. Concept B is testing yourself. Concept C is elaboration and connection. So now maybe you can ask yourself as you leave this space, well, what is the meaning of space practice in a different scenario? Well, I get the way that Andrea was talking to me about it for studying for class. I understand that. Is there some way that I can use space practice for something else entirely? You know, so asking yourself that, seeing what that might look like, seeing how you can apply that idea, that concept to something outside of what the main conversation is. The reason why this is useful is because for you to be able to make those connections, to apply things that maybe don't seem that similar or that obvious, it means that you have to know it pretty well. I usually, when I talk to my students about writing and using analysis in their writing, I use the metaphor of a toaster, right? So maybe I can have a toaster in front of me and I know that it is a toaster. But now, what happens if I decide to break open that toaster and examine its different parts to move more into like elaborating on my knowledge about this machine? So now I'm taking it apart, I'm looking at the wiring, I'm seeing how this conductor might speak with this wire. I'm asking myself, well, what happens if I put the conductor somewhere else, or I reattach these wires in another way, right? I'm playing around with this so I can really learn the inner workings. That then allows me to not only have a better understanding of the concept or the toaster in this case, but now maybe I can build something else. I can take the bits and pieces of that toaster that I've learned how they work, and maybe I can use them for something else entirely and make, you know, maybe I make a little toy car out of them, or I use them to help me build and elevate my computer if I have a homemade computer. But I can only do that if I know how all those parts work and how they come back together as a whole. That's how you have to think about analysis in the classroom, or when you're even studying for yourself, making sure that you know how the different parts work and you know how they work together when they come together, but also know how they work when they come apart. And so constantly be just asking yourself those questions and figuring that out. Another way that you can practice that and to kind of test yourself to see, well, how much of this do I really know, is to just put your teacher hat on. See what friends you can pull up, or maybe even calling family members and just asking them if they'll give you some time, that you want to teach them something, that you want to talk about this idea. So you can work on explaining a concept to someone who's not familiar with it already, because that requires you to put it in your own terms. If they're not in the same class as you, you can't use all the same language that your teachers are using, because you know your friend might not understand those terms or have that same vocabulary. So now you have to learn how to put it into your own words, which means that you know it a little bit if you're able to do that instead of just parroting what you read or what you heard. But also now you have to explain why it matters. They might also have follow-up questions, and then you can see how many of those questions you're able to ask. And as you're doing this, you should take notes for yourself. See what questions you weren't able to answer, and see maybe how you can bring that into your space practice in the future, the ways that you're reviewing your notes going forward. So we won't, just due to time, we won't have this as a big, large kind of nitty-gritty conversation with the breakout groups, but I do want to see how you all are understanding some of these strategies, and maybe we can talk about some of the questions that are here on this slide. So let's break down space practice first. Would one of you be able to kind of explain how you understood that strategy?
Yeah, so I actually used it my last quarter, like with my health class.
Mm-hmm.
What I would do is like, it was online, so, and like I started to get like irritated like after being on like in front of the screen for too long. But what I would do is like over the different periods of days, I would have like an hour or two of working on the class. And what I would do is I would like work on a module for like say 15 to 20 minutes, and then get like some rest period and then work on it again for 15 to 20 minutes. And just sort of like, so it wasn't all together in the same day, because like the more you do something, it's like, especially if it's homework and it's not something you don't want to do, then like eventually like your effort deteriorates, and so does your memory and like how you recall it and everything.
Okay, excellent. So then it sounds like you got into a good habit of doing space practice, partly out of necessity, and then learning how to be intentional about it. And that's excellent. So let's see. Would someone else be able to kind of answer the question of the work that we might need to do on ourselves or for ourselves in order to build a habit of space practice? So how can we begin incorporating space practice into our lives moving forward? Maybe Tamara?
I think the way you develop the habit is by repetition, and then when it comes to like the way you are during your studies is just keep doing it over a long period of time and testing your memorization and using different like habits and different spaces and notebooks and things of that nature to keep your studies and everything organized over a period of time.
Mm-hmm. So then, but if we were to kind of make that feel a little more concrete and like real, so we have the idea of how to do it, but what would that actually look like in your life? What is something that you might need to do in order to ensure that you can keep space practice going?
For me is like note taking and like my schedule, because the way I have my schedule, it literally is set up hour to hour, especially with school, about how I do my certain things and when I do classes and when I need to take a break. So I'm not overworking myself and getting stuck in like an irritated state. And for me, my schedule, my calendar, and my note taking, it really kind of like helps me in that like area.
Great, excellent. So I'll say if we can hold on to some of what the questions are that's on this slide and maybe think about that in between this session and the next session, that would be good. That's also another way of practicing space practice, right? Reviewing the notes, so that we can keep kind of thinking about these things. But in the interest of time, I will move forward. So I will kind of break down, mix it up, and hack your memory. These are like the bonus learning strategy tips. Essentially, and this mix it up pairs really well with space practice. So keep it fresh when studying the same subject during different study sessions. So going back over ideas in a different order than the way that you reviewed them last time. It's pretty frequent or pretty common for us to just like read our notes from top to bottom and then keep doing that in the same order over and over again. But it could be really good for you to mix it up, to maybe read one portion, to go back to another portion. This is also where you can bring in reviewing older information and connecting it back to new information. So finding ways to switch between different topics and different concepts in one study session. And this allows you to also practice elaboration as well. Is there a way that you can even switch your studying between classes that have some similarities, and then now you're making connections? Maybe you're in a psychology course as well as a sociology course, and you've noticed that they have some similar ideas, but these are different classes. So one way that you can kind of study and practice and work on elaboration for yourself is seeing, well, how do they talk about this concept in psychological terms? How are they talking about this concept in sociological terms? Where are they similar and where are they different? And so now you're able to do that work of studying for both courses separately, but also together, which just deepens your own knowledge of that material. And so how it works, again, this is why it's important to think about purpose. It makes it easier for us to keep doing these things if we know how and why it works. With mixing it up, it helps to ensure that you don't fall into autopilot. So we're trying to keep your memory recall and your retrieval muscles as strong as possible. By mixing things up, you'll have to rely on memory retrieval for more medium and long-term memory from medium and long-term memory storage, as opposed to relying only on short-term memory, right? Which is what we can make really strong through cramming, but it's not as helpful to us. So mixing up allows us to really kind of get into our long-term memory. And then, of course, there's hack or enhance your memory. And that's just having fun with mnemonic devices, seeing what kind of patterns you can create that will help you remember what you're studying. So PEMDAS is one that they used to teach a lot for remembering the mathematical order of operations. They also used to say, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. And then that would help someone remember, parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. That would have been really embarrassing if I did not remember. But you see, I've been pretty far from high school math, which is when I first learned that, or even middle school. And I was able to kind of go through those order of operations because that mnemonic is so ingrained in my brain. It has helped me remember over time. So sometimes you can make different songs. You can make your own lyrics, your own rhymes. When I was studying other languages, for me, trying to remember all of the different verb conjugations or different vocabulary in French, I would make little sentences using the first letter of each of those terms just to help me remember what the different verb conjugations are or what the different vocabulary terms were. Maybe I couldn't remember them on my own, but the fact that I linked them to a simple sentence ended up making it easier for me to retrieve that memory. So then for next week, we have a session from 2 to 3 as well. And that will be kind of keying more into critical reading skills. So I have some work for you to kind of work on in the interim. So this is why this session is cut a little shorter so that you can do some of this work in your own time. If you remember, again, with space practice, or the idea that college is partly in class, partly on your own. So you can put that into practice here. So some things, I want you to reflect on that word purpose, what it means to you, what comes to mind when you hear purpose, how might it bear relevance to your upcoming college journey. There is an identity map activity that will be made available to you via Canvas and email. So you'll be kind of exploring bits and pieces of who you are, bits and pieces of your identity. And we'll bring that into how we can use those tools of how you identify yourself for analysis, recognizing how you yourself can be a source of inspiration, but also a text, right? That a text is not just a book that you're reading. Oftentimes you'll be in college courses and the text for the week is a movie, or the text for the week is yourself. So how can we learn to apply analytical skills to a subject that we know relatively well, being ourselves? So that's why you'll do the map activity before we have the session so that we can talk through it and see what kind of tools and skills we can use to break that down. You'll watch this TED Talk. It's only about 5 or so minutes. There's more to life than being happy. And then you'll read Chimamanda Adichie's Danger of a Single Story. That again is short. It's about 4 PDF pages. And so we'll be using the TED Talk, the identity map activity, as well as Danger of a Single Story to really put into practice some critical reading skills. Instead of me just telling you how to work on critical reading, we'll actually be able to kind of do that alongside each other next week. So thank you for listening for this presentation and for participating. And now I would say we could open up for any questions that we might have.
Please don't be shy. As well as this topic, you have a woman that is pursuing a PhD, which means she did the undergrad and then went on to graduate school and has an interesting, when you reach the PhD level, you have the opportunity to create your own research and decide on whatever topic you would like to pursue. And that is the basis of your PhD. So I know that's a long way off to you right now, but I wanted to plug that in, that you have a person that's in that process now that's available to answer any questions according to her experience, as well as about the presentation that she just provided.
Yes, I'm open to questions about that as well. It doesn't have to just be about learning strategies.
I'll ask a question myself. With the pursuit of your PhD, what stoked that intellectual curiosity that led you to move from undergrad on through to graduate school?
That's a great question. So the honest answer is a mix of things. Well, the joking honest answer is that being a student and being in the classroom is one thing that I've always just been super good at. And the only other thing that I used to do would be working in food service, which I also love. I loved being a server. But when it came down to it, I was like, what skills do I actually really have? I'm good at reading and writing and teaching. So that's kind of the short answer. But the reality is I had been teaching for a long time through different programs. So I actually started doing different kinds of peer education when I was 13. So I did that throughout my 8th grade and through high school. And then I got into college and, you know, I had a very kind of typical route, which was that I changed my major a few times. I went in as an English and psychology major, and then I transferred schools actually, and I decided on gender studies because I was already politically involved with some things along that line. And so I found that really interesting. I was really getting into the idea, not just of like the politics of things, but also like the theory. I thought I've always been that person that asks why. My father used to hate that when I was a toddler. It was why this, why that. But it really is a part of who I am. And so I'm always like, well, why is the world working this way? Why do people see things in certain manners? And so that helped me a lot. And this is also what I was saying with the identity map, because I can't deny, like, I'm a Black woman and my research tends to be, or at least started with that, with gender studies. And then I got into African-American studies because my main question was, you know, what does it mean to be me in this world? How are other people seeing me? How do I see myself? And in what way can some of this material in the classroom help me get a better understanding of that for myself and to share with others? You know, I always loved English, I loved reading, but nothing really pulled me in as much as those particular topics. And so that's how I decided to stay on that route, as well as being politically active outside of college too, and finding a way that I can pull in my work life to my personal interests. I love that, you know, being a doctoral student has allowed me to do that in a way that's acceptable and profitable.
Wonderful, wonderful. That passion comes through.
Mm-hmm.
And that's your story is a good story for our students to hear, because it went from one thing to another. And then also along the way, I'm sure you employed a lot of what you talked about today to reach that objective. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that personal story.
Oh, so let's see, Miguel's question. How do you feel about following your dreams like dance, music, acting, etc., versus choosing a career choice that is more practical, like lawyers or health services? That's a great question. And that is one that we kind of do explore in this other course that I teach, because there's just no one size fits all answer. And I think that is why it goes back to that idea of purpose too, in a lot of ways, and really figuring out who you are, what your interests are, and what you need to feel fulfilled in life. So for some people, they might have a need for more material or financial security. And so what feels right for them is going into a position that they know can complete that, but also allows them time to explore hobbies that meet their dreams. But for some other folks who are artists or creatives in some way, or just, you know, whatever kind of thing that they're interested in, they really see that as not being separable from themselves. And so they think that, you know, if I'm going to have a job, it needs to be one that is aligned with that part of me. And so that's why I just say that there's no like fast and easy answer, because who we are as individuals really helps dictate that as well. Figuring out what our needs are and whether or not there actually are needs and our desires, right? As opposed to whether it's something we're doing for our family, something that we've just been taught that we're supposed to do, that this is the job that's correct for our interests, but maybe something else will come up. And that's why I heavily emphasize, like, where you can, taking your gen eds and what electives that you can take to really see what other world is available. One of my friends, I'll just use this as an example, she loves dance. That's something that she's always loved, but she's also been interested in some aspects of continuing scholarship. Well, our Black Studies department, we have the African American Dance Company. And so she was able to continue doing dance, but also bring that into her research. So now she's following her dreams of being a dancer, but she's also able to kind of do what some people might say is a more like stable career path, with getting into like being a professor and educator in that way, but she's bringing in dance to that. So that way it's never something that she feels like she had to compromise on. But we don't know always that those options exist if we don't explore the different resources that are available. And sometimes we have to craft it ourselves. IU has an individualized major that you can create. One of my students created like an underwater anthropology major. And that's specifically what she did, was exploring like societies and ideas underwater. And she was able to get different classes that would meet that and work alongside counselors that would ensure that it's still academically rigorous. But it's because that was a passion she had that wasn't being outrightly offered by the university yet. And so there's so many ways to combine following your dreams and choosing something that might seem more practical or doable. That was a very long answer, but I hope I attended to what you asked.
That was a great answer.
It was a great answer. I included a link to the auditorium newsletter that just came out, which highlights a lot of alum that are in the performance area. So you may want to click on that link and you'll see that there is a future in that area of study.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe following on that question and your response, Andrea, you're a first generation student. Mm-hmm. And so how did you manage and navigate that, talking with your family about maybe they had certain ideas and pathways they wanted you to pursue compared to what you have, or maybe they were very supportive of it. Different families have different responses, and sometimes that's difficult for a first generation student to go back and talk to their family about the path that they are choosing. So any advice you have on that?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, so for me and my experience, I have an older brother, but he ended up going somewhat on a different path. And so he didn't complete high school, like at the time that he was in it, but he has his GED now and everything. But so for me, I didn't have that many immediate examples to look to. And I think that my parents also kind of recognized that in some ways. And I had been considered a high achieving student. So I had been tracked in certain ways that I had some resources in middle school and high school, but it was confusing and it was hard. I think a lot of times those resources at the time, the assumption is that I would know how to use them or know even to what to look for. So I didn't always get the help that I needed, and I didn't know how to ask my parents sometimes. So I had that bad habit that some of us might have, especially if you're, oldest children or young, only children, of trying to like do everything yourself. So I got into that habit because I didn't want to like burden my parents with questions that they weren't sure they could answer, or sometimes if they ever felt some insecurity about where they were at versus where I might be going, and I never wanted to trigger that in them. So then for a while, I was kind of just trying to see what resources I could, find when I got into college, and just seeing what was possible for me, but then also learning how to have more open conversations with my parents. So they never had necessarily a set idea of what would be the right career for me, but I did still have to open conversation with them so that they could see what I'm doing, so that they could see the different kind of options that are available, and so that they would feel more secure in talking to me about it. Because I think sometimes they actually felt like they couldn't have a say because they couldn't relate, you know, whether being not from this country originally or not having the same kind of educational path, but helping them realize that they do, you know, we can have an open conversation about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it and how it matters and how it relates and will help us build, you know, a better future. That's been fun, kind of, you know, having those kind of conversations with your parents, especially when you're younger. That just doesn't seem like the kind of thing you say to your parents, but it has been interesting, and I'm grateful that they've been supportive in that way.
Thanks so much for sharing that.
Thank you. I'd like to add a point that you brought up. It was the point of options. So many times we come into college thinking that a major is this. Mm-hmm. And we really don't unpack that major. So we could be very interested in acting and theater, and we don't realize that there's business that goes into that as well. The business side of theater, the communications side of theater, the telecommunications and the marketing of that profession. So while you're pursuing that profession, you can always add other elements to strengthen your package and your when you go to apply for a position, you have these other skills that others may not have. You could be a great actor, but you can also have the foundation to be a great filmmaker or a great marketing person.
I agree. I think that that's something super important to keep in mind, because it's, especially when you're thinking about, you know, going onto the job market, what can help make you marketable, but also what makes you unique, what makes you special, you know, what can help separate you out from others. And it might be having that kind of unconventional package because you took some of these other classes for electives or certain minors, or you're going in with one major and now you're doing something else, but you can show them how you apply those different skills. That can really give you a leg up on some of the competition too.
I think that ties in with what you were talking about earlier about elaboration and connection in your coursework, right? You know, if you can do that with your courses, that's going to give you that practice to be able to do that with future job career opportunities and things like that.
That's, I actually had, before I started teaching through the Student Academic Center, I was teaching through my home department, African Diaspora Studies. And I had a student, I actually had a couple of students where this happened, but one in particular who was a Kelly student. And they were taking a bunch of AAADS courses because they were really interested in it, but they felt unsure about what it would look like to establish a minor or to keep kind of accruing these classes. And so they were kind of at wit's end about it, and they didn't feel like they could totally talk about how these things relate, that it just seemed like they were doing this for fun. So I sat down with them and we were able to talk about how the things that they're learning in this humanities class, you know, in this like history and sociological course through the like Black history lens, how they can apply that to going out into the business world. And then they were able to, you know, it's the kind of thing when we meet, I say a little bit, but I mostly want them to come to the answers themselves. But they were able to see how having this background where we're talking about not just one race, we're talking about a lot of different races, different histories, and ways that people connect. They could see how that could be helpful for them in management, being able to understand people's different backgrounds so that they can actually help form stronger teams, you know, for them. I've had it where I've talked to some of my students who are thinking about going into med school, and they also want a minor in AAADS. And it's a part of it is they're like, well, this doesn't have to do with medicine, but they realize that actually when they're practicing, they might have all different people as patients. And so being able to have that background knowledge and connect some of the stuff that they were learning and that they have these deep personal interests in with the seemingly more practical career route, how they can kind of create this whole new package that makes them incredibly special and can make them even more sought after.
Yeah, great examples.
Any other questions? Feel free It's an open forum. Anything that's on your mind, we can answer it. Okay. Well, Lisa, I want you to take the opportunity to plug the newsletter and the other items that they will receive from us in the near future, and then we will close.
Sure. So as soon as you're coming on campus or the school year officially begins, you should get the weekly newsletter and make sure to read it all the way through to the end. At least skim through, and you'll see a lot of career events, opportunities, information about advisors, the tutoring hours. Oh my gosh, just everything. So we do want to make sure that you read that, and all of our communications that come through the IUB 21CS email. And you can also email us there with any questions. So looking forward to seeing everybody.
Thank you, Lisa. I felt it important to have Lisa say a few things because you're going to see the emails coming from our email, our central email account, and also from Lisa. So put a voice to the name so you're familiar with it. Another additional thing, it's important that you respond to some of the surveys that will be coming out. Being that we're in a virtual environment, we're going to be sending some surveys, some questionnaires, so that we can get immediate feedback so that we can be responsive to your needs. Since we're not going to see you on a daily basis like we normally do during this COVID environment, it's going to be important for us to have that communication online. So as we just heard, with some of these study techniques, some of these approaches to success, please be proactive with your communications that are electronic and also voice. So any other points that anyone wants to bring up before we close this session? Okay.
Real quick, just one more thing, sorry. The Canvas course, we will put the homework assignment up there. So maybe everybody can be looking out for a notification.
Yes, we'll send it out via Canvas. Please look at it via Canvas and check your email when you receive the next notice for the upcoming session. Thank you so much. Everyone, be safe and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care, everybody.